My name was Sergeant Christopher Gillies, and at 28, I died serving my country in Afghanistan. But this isn't a story about military heroism or patriotic sacrifice. This is the story of how I planned my most important revenge years before I died. A revenge against my own family, to protect the only thing that ever truly mattered, my son Daniel. If you knew what I know now about the Gillies family from Baltimore, Maryland, you'd understand why every cent of my life insurance was strategically designed as a trap. A family that once had name and money, but for decades survived on shady dealings, petty scams, and a sick obsession with easy money. My parents, Robert and Patricia Gillies, along with my older brothers Marcus and Tyler, were specialists in loans they never intended to repay, fraudulent insurance claims, and partnerships with shady individuals. They lived off facades and lies, always looking for the next chance to make money without working for it. I grew up watching my father Robert spend hours on the phone, scheming with crooked lawyers and corrupt insurance brokers. "Christopher," he would say with that fake smile I knew all too well, "life's about working smart, not hard. Honest work is for suckers." My mother Patricia was no different. She forged medical documents to receive government benefits and had at least 3 different identities in different states to run credit card scams. Marcus, my oldest brother, had inherited the family DNA perfectly. By 25, he already had police records for fraud and scams, but always managed to walk free thanks to the family's connections with shady attorneys. Tyler, just 2 years older than me, preferred smaller but constant hustles, selling cars with hidden problems, scamming elderly people through fake telemarketing, and running a shell company that existed only on paper to launder money of questionable origin. At 18, I'd had enough of that circus. I wanted honor, purpose, something bigger than scamming innocent people out of a few bucks. The day I announced I was enlisting in the Army, the family's reaction was explosive. "You've lost your mind, Christopher," my father shouted, slamming his fist on the kitchen table of our house in Fells Point. "Soldiers don't get rich, soldiers die poor and forgotten." My mother tried a more manipulative approach. "Honey, you have so much potential here with us. Marcus was just talking about a new insurance scheme that could bring in thousands every month. Why waste your brains serving a government that doesn't care about you?" But I was resolute. I had seen what that life had done to them, turned people who could have been respectable into parasites on society. The day I left for basic training at Fort Benning, Georgia, my father gave me the last words I'd hear from him for months. "When you come back broke and broken, don't come crawling to us. Gillies don't support failures." The Army gave me exactly what I was looking for: discipline, purpose, and most importantly, distance from my toxic family. During my first deployment, I learned not just how to be a soldier, but how to be a man. I learned about loyalty, sacrifice, and what it means to protect something bigger than yourself. It was during a leave in 2019, at age 23, that I met Amanda Richardson at a coffee shop near the University of Maryland. She was studying business administration, had piercing green eyes, and a laugh that made my stomach flip. We fell in love fast, the kind of love that knows time is limited. Amanda was everything my family wasn't: honest, hardworking, with real dreams of building a solid career. She came from a middle-class family in Annapolis. Her dad was an accountant, her mom a school teacher. Normal, decent people who paid their bills and slept peacefully at night. When Amanda got pregnant, 6 months after we met, everything changed. It wasn't an easy conversation. We were in her apartment, a small studio near campus, and she was holding the pregnancy test with trembling hands. "Christopher, I don't want to be a mom," she said, her words cutting through the air like a cold blade. "I have dreams, college, a whole life ahead of me. If you want this baby, that's your problem." She made it clear she would only have the child if I took full responsibility. She didn't want him in her life. The decision was simple. I chose my son before he was even born. Daniel came into the world in January 2020.
a healthy 7-pound baby who cried like a little warrior. Amanda kept her word. She signed over full custody, kissed me on the cheek, and disappeared from our lives. I never saw her again. At 22, I became a single parent, trying to balance increasingly dangerous military missions with the responsibility of raising a child. Daniel became my reason to live, my moral compass, proof that I could be different from my family.
When I had to leave for long deployments, I had no choice but to leave Daniel with my parents. At first, they seemed like they'd changed. Patricia cooked for Daniel, Robert took him to the park, and Marcus even bought him a few toys. I thought maybe the presence of an innocent child had awakened some humanity in them. But gradually, troubling signs began to appear. Daniel, once a cheerful and talkative boy, became unusually quiet after staying with my parents. When I returned from missions, he clung to me like he was afraid I'd leave again. "Daddy, I don't like when you go away," he told me one night as I tucked him into bed at our small military house at Fort Campbell, Kentucky. He was only 3, but there was a sadness in his eyes no child should ever have. "Why, buddy? Don't Grandpa and Grandma take good care of you?" I asked, trying to sound casual. Daniel hesitated, nervously playing with the blanket. "Grandpa gets mad when I cry. He says boys don't cry, and that Daddy won't come back if I act like a baby." My blood ran cold. I started paying more attention to the details. Bruises would appear on Daniel's arms, which my parents explained away as normal kid tumbles. He developed the habit of hiding food under his bed, as if he was afraid of going hungry. More alarmingly, he started wetting the bed every time I mentioned I'd have to leave for another mission. During a leave at home, I decided to investigate. I discreetly installed a small camera in the living room of my parents' house, hidden behind a picture frame. What I saw in the footage made me sick. Robert yelled at Daniel for simple things like spilling juice. Patricia often forgot to feed him properly, letting him cry for hours while she stayed on the phone coordinating her schemes. Marcus, when he was around, treated my son like a nuisance, pushing him away whenever Daniel tried to get his attention. Worse yet, I discovered they were already planning what to do with my military life insurance money. During a secretly recorded conversation, I heard Patricia say, "If something happens to Christopher, God forbid, at least we won't have to worry about money for a while. $400,000 is a decent chunk." Robert responded with his usual coldness, "And the kid? We can't just dump him." Patricia said casually, "There are orphanages for that. We're too old and tired for kids. The money's to compensate for our loss, after all." At that moment, I realized my family didn't see Daniel as my son, but as an obstacle between them and the insurance money. They were literally waiting for me to die so they could get rid of my child and keep my inheritance. That's when I began planning my posthumous revenge. First, I documented everything. I discreetly took photos of Daniel's bruises, recorded incriminating conversations with my family, and compiled evidence of years of emotional and physical neglect. I created a detailed dossier exposing who the Gillies of Baltimore really were. Second, I identified who truly deserved to care for Daniel if anything ever happened to me. Sergeant First Class Tony Martinez was my best friend in the Army, an honorable man from El Paso, Texas, who had served for 15 years. Tony and his wife, Denise, had tried for years to have children, but fertility issues had made it impossible. They had love to give and the financial stability to raise a child properly. In casual conversations, I learned that Tony and Denise had considered adoption, but the process was long and expensive. "Sometimes God has other plans for us," Tony once told me as we watched Daniel playing in the base courtyard. "But if I could give a child the love I can't give my own, it would be the greatest honor of my life." Third, I built a strong legal plan. I discreetly consulted with a military attorney specializing in family law, Captain Sarah Chen, about how to protect Daniel if something happened to me.
She helped me understand the legal complexities between temporary and permanent guardianship and how documented neglect could be used to remove a child from a harmful environment. Sergeant Gillies, she explained during a confidential consultation, if you have documented evidence of neglect, that information could be critical in determining the child's best interest. Courts always prioritize the well-being of the minor over traditional family rights. Fourth, I timed everything. I knew I would be deployed to Afghanistan in 2024, a particularly dangerous mission in a region with high insurgent activity. The stats didn't lie. Soldiers on ground patrols were at higher risk due to improvised explosive devices. I wrote a detailed letter to Tony, sealed and delivered with specific instructions. Tony, if anything happens to me, open this exactly 6 months after my death. Protect my son from my own family. They are not who they appear to be. In the letter, I detailed the entire history of my parents' neglect of Daniel, including the bruises I'd secretly photographed, transcripts of recorded conversations where they discussed getting rid of him, and my well-founded suspicions about their true intentions with the insurance money. I also included a second sealed letter addressed to the Maryland Child Protective Services with copies of all the evidence and a formal request that Tony and Denise be considered Daniel's preferred adoptive parents. Most importantly, I revised my military life insurance policy, which technically the money was designated for Daniel as the beneficiary, with my parents listed as temporary guardians. The letter included specific legal instructions on how the funds should be managed. Any misuse of the money could result in criminal charges for misappropriation. During my final months before deployment, I spent more time with Daniel, building memories I hoped would sustain him in the difficult years to come. I taught him how to ride a bike, took him fishing at the lake near the base, and every night before bed he would pray, "God, please protect Daddy and bring him back home safe." "Buddy," I said on our last night together, "no matter what happens, remember that Daddy loves you more than anything in the world. And if one day things get tough, know that Daddy always planned to protect you." Daniel, now nearly 6, hugged me tightly. "Daddy, you're coming back, right?" "I'll do my best, son. But if I can't, you're going to be okay." Daddy made sure of that. When I deployed to Afghanistan in February 2024, I carried 2 certainties. I would do my duty as a soldier to the very end, and if anything happened to me, my son would be protected from my family's greed. The first 2 months of deployment were relatively calm. We patrolled villages, provided security for humanitarian convoys, and built relationships with the local population. I spoke to Daniel through video calls whenever possible, watching him grow up through a pixelated screen. My parents rarely answered those calls. When they did, they made a show of how well they were caring for Daniel, but I could see the sadness in my son's eyes. He was just surviving, waiting for me to come back. In March 2024, during a routine patrol mission near Kandahar, my unit was tasked with investigating reports of insurgent activity. It was a hot morning, the kind of dry desert heat that makes your sweat evaporate before it even forms on your skin. I was on point, checking a side path the locals avoided, when I stepped in the wrong place.
The explosion was instant. One moment I was scanning a suspicious trail, the next a blinding white light, and then nothing. I died instantly after stepping on an improvised landmine, leaving Daniel orphaned at the age of 6. News of my death reached my family in Baltimore 3 days later, delivered by 2 Army officers who knocked on my parents' door. Patricia faked devastation, crying dramatically for the officers, while Robert played the role of the grieving patriarch, speaking about his son's heroism. But I knew the truth. The moment those officers left, My family immediately began calculating how to split the $400,000 in life insurance. "Well," Robert said, wasting no time pretending, "at least Christopher finally did something useful for this family." Marcus, always the pragmatist, was already looking into investments. 400,000 divided by the four of us. That's 100 grand each. Not a fortune, but a good start. "And the kid?" Tyler asked, almost as an afterthought. Patricia had the audacity to sigh, as if making a sacrifice. "We'll have to figure something out for Daniel. We're too old and tired for kids. There are public orphanages that handle these situations." Less than a week after receiving the life insurance on behalf of Daniel, they executed exactly the plan I had recorded 2 years earlier. They took my 6-year-old son to Baltimore City Department of Social Services and blatantly lied to caseworkers. "We're not financially or physically able to raise a child," Patricia said, with fake tears any actress could envy. "The loss of our son Christopher has devastated us, and we just can't give Daniel the care he deserves." Robert added his carefully rehearsed lie. "We want the best for the boy, but our age and our financial situation just don't allow us to be the guardians he needs." The social worker, Michael Thompson, a well-meaning but overwhelmed man, believed the performance. Daniel was entered into Maryland's public foster system and sent to the Sunshine Children's Home, an overcrowded institution in East Baltimore. While my 6-year-old son cried in an orphanage, sleeping in a bunk bed in a room with 15 other kids, my family began their spending spree. Robert bought a brand-new Cadillac Escalade. Patricia remodeled the kitchen and hired a landscaper. Marcus paid off his credit cards and invested in another shady scheme. Tyler started planning a trip to Las Vegas. Within 4 months, they had spent $200,000 of the $400,000 meant for my son. Daniel, who had already endured years of emotional neglect, was now living in squalid conditions. Sunshine Children's Home, while well-intentioned, was chronically underfunded. The kids received basic care, but very little individual attention or affection, the kind a traumatized child desperately needs. But I had prepared for exactly this scenario.
In September 2024, exactly 6 months after my death, Tony Martinez opened the sealed letter I had left for him. His hands trembled as he read the first few pages, his expression shifting from confusion to horror, then to the firm resolve I knew so well. "Denise," he called out to his wife, "you need to see this. Christopher, God, Christopher knew exactly what was going to happen." Denise read the letter over her husband's shoulder, her tears dripping onto the paper as she absorbed the extent of my family's betrayal. "Tony, we need to act immediately. That child is suffering while those monsters are spending his money." Tony didn't waste a second. The next day, he handed over my detailed letter to Maryland's Child Protective Services, along with all the evidence I had compiled. Photos of Daniel's bruises, audio recordings of my family planning to get rid of him, and financial documents showing how they were blowing through his inheritance while he lived in a group home. The reaction was immediate and devastating for my family. Detective Lisa Warren of the Baltimore Police Department, a veteran in financial crimes, received the case and was shocked by the depth of documentation I'd left behind. "In 20 years of service," she told the district attorney, "I've never seen such a well-documented case of premeditated child neglect and misappropriation." Child Protective Services launched a formal investigation and uncovered that my parents had lied on multiple official forms about their financial situation. They claimed financial hardship to justify placing Daniel in foster care,
while bank records showed lavish spending using his life insurance. When investigators showed up at my parents' house with search and seizure warrants, each family member's reaction revealed exactly who they were. Robert tried to bribe Detective Warren. "Look, this is all a misunderstanding. How about we talk like civilized people? I'm sure we can reach an agreement that works for everyone." Patricia went into full panic mode, screaming about persecution and claiming they were being criminalized for a family tragedy. Marcus tried to escape through the back door when he saw the squad cars, but was caught trying to jump the backyard fence. Tyler, always the coward, immediately threw everyone else under the bus. "I told you we should have kept the kid, but nobody listened to me." The bank records didn't lie. In just 4 months, they had spent exactly $203,847 of Daniel's life insurance on personal expenses, while telling the court they couldn't afford to care for him.
The charges came swiftly, and they were brutal. Robert and Patricia Gillies were formally charged with first-degree child neglect, misappropriation of funds intended for a minor, and fraud against government institutions. Marcus and Tyler, as beneficiaries of the scheme, were charged with misappropriation and conspiracy. District Attorney James Morrison had no trouble building the case. The evidence compiled by the late Sergeant Gillies created one of the most airtight family neglect cases we've ever prosecuted, he said in a press briefing. This family systematically abused a vulnerable child and stole his inheritance, all while lying to government officials. The court ordered immediate restitution of the $203,847 spent, plus interest and penalties totaling $267,000. Since they had already burned through the money and didn't have enough assets to repay it, their properties were seized. The Gillies' home in Fells Point was sold at auction. Robert was sentenced to 8 years in prison. Patricia received 6 years. Marcus and Tyler each got 4 years, with the possibility of parole in 2 for good behavior. But the real victory wasn't the sentences. It was what happened to Daniel. Tony and Denise Martinez, following the exact instructions I left in the letter, filed a formal petition for adoption. With Daniel's remaining insurance funds now overseen by the court as a protected educational trust, and with overwhelming evidence proving my family was unfit, the adoption process moved quickly. In December 2024, Daniel Martinez, as he is now named, was officially adopted by Tony and Denise. He moved to El Paso, Texas, where he finally has what he always deserved, a family that genuinely loves him, with no interest in his money. I know that Daniel now smiles, really smiles, for the first time in years. I know he builds Lego castles with Denise in the living room, fortified with the patience of a real mother's love. I know he drew a letter for me, even though he understands I'll never read it. Daddy Christopher, thank you for finding me a real family. The insurance money, now properly managed by the court, ensures that Daniel will have the resources for college and a solid start in adulthood. Tony established an educational savings account that will grow until Daniel turns 18, guaranteeing he'll never have to worry about money while building an honest future. More importantly, Daniel is finally receiving proper therapy to process the trauma of his early years. His grades in school have improved dramatically, and he now talks about wanting to be a soldier like my first daddy when he grows up. My posthumous revenge was never about punishing my family, though they certainly earned their fate. It was about ensuring my son had the chance to become the kind of man I know he can be, free from the toxicity that poisoned generations of Gillies. Daniel now has something I never had growing up. A family that loves him for who he is, not what he can provide. That was my true victory, breaking the cycle of greed and manipulation that defined my family for decades. From beyond, I can finally rest in peace, knowing my son is safe and loved, just as I planned.